Hey friends, welcome to the Raising Boys and Girls podcast. I'm Sissy Goff.
And I'm David Thomas.
And I'm Melissa Trevathan.
And we're so glad you joined us for this conversation. Let's dive in.
Jennifer B. Wallace is an award-winning journalist and author of the instant New York Times best-selling book, Never Enough: When Achievement Pressure Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. Her second book, Mattering: Building a Life of Value at Home, Work, and in the Larger World, to be published in 2026, is based on 5 years of research and an original global Mattering survey. Wallace is the co-founder of the Mattering Movement, a nonprofit whose mission is to create cultures of mattering in schools, workplaces, and communities. After graduating from Harvard College, Jennifer was a broadcast producer for CBS 60 Minutes and was part of the team that won the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Excellence in Journalism. She's a contributor to the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and frequently appears on national television programs to discuss her work. Wallace is a highly sought-after speaker and has spoken at more than 100 Fortune 500 companies, conferences, nonprofits, and schools about mattering. Get ready to take notes as we share this really important conversation with Jennifer B. Wallace. Jennifer, we are so excited to have you on the podcast. We have loved learning about your work and the important work you're doing in the world, the important conversations that you're creating. And we would love for you to start with maybe telling a little bit about yourself, your story, your family, how you found your way to the work you're doing today.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a fan of your podcast, so I'm thrilled to be on. So I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for almost 30 years now. And I spent my early days at 60 Minutes, where I produced for Morley Safer. And then when I had my kids, I turned to print. And I have 3 children. I have an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 14-year-old.
Wow. You're in the middle of it.
I'm in the thick of it. And actually, boy, do I love teenagers. This is my sweet spot, I think, in parenting. I absolutely love teens. I absolutely loved talking with the hundreds and hundreds of teenagers I did in researching the book. But what sort of led to the work that is in your lap right now, Never Enough, was that over the years of my parenting, I'd been noticing just how different my kids' lives were than my own growing up. You know, I have similar values than my parents did. I believe in family dinners and weekends spent playing as a family and downtime as a family. And yet my husband would be going off in one direction on a Saturday and Sunday to soccer. I'd be taking another person to chess. Family dinners were hijacked by homework. And I was thinking, how did childhood become so competitive, so adult-led? And so that's really what ultimately led to this book. I actually remember I was on the sidelines of one of my kids' soccer games, and we were an hour and a half away. He was 8 years old. It was sleeting. It was freezing. Yeah. And I turned to the other parents on the sidelines and I said, why are we doing this? What is this all for?
Yes.
And they looked at me like I was crazy. So that's why I researched the book. I wanted to figure out, why are we doing this? And is it working?
Yes.
You have so many parents listening right now who are so thankful you were asking that question and willing to do a deep dive into the research. And Jennifer, it's no surprise that book became an immediate bestseller because everything you're saying is resonating with every parent listening. And so will you go deeper into talking about that, of just what you discovered in terms of why we put our kids at risk in our effort for them to achieve?
Exactly. So on that at-risk point, so in 2019, I wrote an article for the Washington Post that was covering 2 national policy reports. And these are the National Academies of Sciences and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. These are 2 really important reports that our government uses to set policy. And they were naming the kids most at risk for negative health outcomes. And they added a new at-risk group, and it was students attending what the researchers were calling high-achieving schools. Those are public and private schools all around the country where the kids go off to, competitive 4-year colleges. These kids were now officially at risk, meaning they were
Wow.
2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression, and 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse disorder than the average American teen. And these were my kids that I was writing about, and I wanted to know why. I've yet to meet a parent that has not had the best interests for their kids. I have yet to meet that. And so, as you mentioned, I dug into the research. I actually conducted a first of its kind parenting survey with a researcher at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I set out this survey. He said to me, we need at least 1,000 responses to really get to look at patterns of how parents were feeling about the pressure on their kids today. But within a few days, over 6,500 parents had filled out
Wow.
this form. And I'd love to read you a couple of the things I asked the parents. And I was
Please.
Please do.
so deeply impressed by their honesty. So I asked parents on a scale from 1 to 4 how much they agreed or disagreed with statements like, I feel responsible for my children's achievement and success.
Mm.
75% of parents somewhat or strongly agreed. And this was a nationally representative sample. This was not just families in affluent pockets, or these were families all over the country. I also asked, again, on this 1 to 4 scale, how much they agreed or disagreed with. Others think that my children's academic success is a reflection of my parenting.
Mm.
83% of parents somewhat or strongly agreed. And I'll just leave you with this last one. I asked them, I wish today's childhood was less stressful for my kids. 87% of parents somewhat or strongly agreed. So when we talk about sort of the roots of this achievement culture, which I get into a bit in the beginning of the book, there are lots of reasons for it, but the one that resonated most for me is what I call the economic story. So when I was growing up in the 70s and the early 80s, life was generally more affordable. Housing, healthcare, higher education was more affordable. There was slack in the system. So parents like mine could be assured that even with some setbacks, even with a B- in AP calculus, like I got my senior year, that most likely I'd be able to replicate my own childhood as an adult or do even better than my own parents did. That's always been the American dream. But we parents today are facing a different economic reality. We are seeing the first generation, the millennials, who are not doing as well as their parents. And so as parents, we cannot control for the macroeconomic forces of our environment, or the crush of the middle class, or the steep inequity that's been ushered in. And so many parents, like those I surveyed, feel caught. They feel like they have no choice because of a lack of social safety nets in our government. They have to be the safety net for their kids. And so they are banking on the fact that getting their kid into a quote unquote good college, they hope will act as a life vest in a sea of uncertainty. But that life vest is acting too much like a leaded vest, and it's drowning too many of the kids that we are really trying to protect. And there's a better way.
Oh, that is a great analogy. And you are word for word describing what we're hearing from parents in our counseling offices all the time. I'm so grateful you wrote this book. And I want to say, because we haven't had a chance to say it yet, the title of the book is Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. I love that so much. And I've written a couple books here lately on anxiety, and one recently for parents. And you talk about the contribution parents inadvertently make with their own anxiety in the book. Will you talk more about that and how you're hoping parents can change it?
Oh, yes. I think, last week the Surgeon General issued a advisory on
Yes.
parent well-being, and 1 in 2 parents are reporting being so overwhelmed on a daily basis. And I saw this in my own reporting, and I have felt it as a parent of 3 kids. It is overwhelming. We have no structural supports, no safety nets. We are needing to be everything for our kids. It's not sustainable. And
Yes.
so what I have really leaned into in my own life is what I learned from the research. And that is that the best thing we can do to help our children with their well-being and mental health is to make sure our support system, our resilience, our mental health is in check, because a child's resilience rests fundamentally on the resilience of the adults in their lives. And adult resilience rests fundamentally on the depth and support of our relationships.
Mm.
And, we are sold a bill of goods by the multi-billion-dollar wellness industry to light this fancy candle, take a bubble bath, do your nails, download a meditation app, and you'll be resilient. No, those are great stress reducers, but they do not give us the resilience that deep, nourishing relationships give us. And, we're often told as parents to put on your oxygen mask on first, but what I'm saying goes even deeper. I am saying find one or two people in your life who know you intimately, who you can be vulnerable with, who you can open up to, who you can receive the same care and love that you want to give and provide for your own children. Find those people, open up to them, and allow them to reach over and put that oxygen mask on for you, which is a much deeper level of support than we normalize in our culture, in our hyper individualistic culture today.
Yes.
What a great
I
distinction.
know.
You also have a chapter on untangling self-worth from achievement, and would love to just ask you, how do we do that? And how do we even encourage confidence in kids without putting pressure on them?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It's sort of the $1,000,000 question, right? How do we raise our kids to be their full selves without pushing them too far?
Mm.
So in terms of the untangling self-worth from achievement, it's really what the whole book. But it starts, the self becomes stronger, less by being praised, which can feel like pressure, and more by being known. So
Mm,
the most important developmental task for a teen, right, is to develop that healthy sense of self. So what we can do to aid our children in developing that is to, as I say in the book, get a PhD in them, get to know them intimately. What are their natural strengths? If you don't know, which by the way, I didn't know when my kids were little, and I felt like everybody else knew what their kids' strengths were, and I didn't know. So I came across something called the VIA survey. Are you familiar with it? It stands for Values and Action Survey. It was developed by Marty Seligman and Christopher Peterson, the grandfathers of positive psychology, and it's been scientifically validated. And it's a free online survey that you could take for, I think it's about 10 minutes, adults and kids. There are two different versions. You could take it with your family, and it's a quiz, and it helps to bring out your natural strengths. And so we did that as a family. And so when you have a child who's struggling with something, you can look at that list and you could say, which of these strengths could you use to try to overcome that obstacle? Another thing we do in our family is we go around the table on birthdays and we say one thing we love about the birthday boy or girl. And it's never, I love how well you're doing in bio. It's always, it's always, I appreciate how kind you are to everyone, even strangers. Or my daughter would say to my son, I appreciate how even when you have homework, you'll put it aside to help me with my homework. So these things that are just talking about our kids for who they are deep at their core, away from their achievements and successes. And to be clear, to make our kids feel known is not against achievement. It is when we have this strong sense of being loved and known for who we are deep inside, that we really matter. That's what gives us the courage to reach for things that we don't know we can actually reach. We're not afraid to fail. We're not afraid of setbacks because we know that even when we have failures, we still matter. So, I often say to parents, it's through this giving your children this sense of mattering that they have the courage to reach for high goals.
mm.
I love that word mattering too. Well, and we're going to come to that in just a second, your new book. But we also love that you talk about competition. I mean, there are so many things that we are asked about regularly and just are so grateful that you're speaking to. And you even refer to hyper competition, which we certainly see that as well. Will you talk more about that and how we can, with kids, encourage kindness over competition?
Yes. So it's fascinating because I grew up thinking competition is bad. And so much so that as an adult, I would never play singles games or, tennis matches against my friends. I would only do non-mixed doubles where I would play with my girlfriend and the two husbands would play against each other because I felt like competing against a friend was wrong. And then researching this book, I actually, Timothy Galway wrote a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, which is a bit of a cult classic. And in that, and I quote him in the book, in that he talks about how competition actually isn't a bad thing. That competition, when used in healthy ways, encourages when we are competitive, we are not trying to beat out another person. We are instead trying to give our full self to the game so that they have to bring their full self to the game. So it's actually in being competitive that we raise the game of our opponent. And so when you think about competition, not as a wanting to beat someone out, but rather wanting to make each other better, that is how we can frame competition in healthy ways. But I think we also need to talk about what I call in the book the elephant in the room when it comes to hyper competition that can be found in in our high achieving world. And that's envy. And what I say to my child and what I found in the research was that we don't have to judge ourselves for feeling envy. So what I say to my daughter is that we don't have to judge ourselves for these naturally occurring emotions, but we do have to hold ourselves accountable for how we act on our envy.
Mm.
So when we feel envy bubbling up, we can take two paths. We can take the malicious envy path, which is the one that's often modeled for girls in particular in the media, where we cut somebody down so that we feel better by comparison. Or we could take the benign route, which is really looking at the source of our envy with admiration. How is it that they got that? And how can I get it too?
It's a great distinction.
That is a great distinction.
Love that. Thank
Yes,
you for
I need
fleshing
to
that
remember
out
that
with
with
us.
girls.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we want to talk about your newest book, Mattering. I love the subtitle too, Building a Life of Value at Home, Work, and in the Larger World. It is based on 5 years of research with an original Global Mattering survey. Will you talk about just first why you chose to write this book and then what you hope folks will gain from it?
Oh, thank you for asking about it. So when I was researching Never Enough, I was hearing so much from parents about their lack of mattering, feeling like they were going to work, whether they were working as a doctor in a large hospital, a firefighter, a first responder, a teacher, that day in and day out, they were being made to feel like they didn't matter, that they were interchangeable, that they were feeling burnt out. And so what I've come to realize from the research is that if we want to really solve the mental health epidemic of our youth, we need to go upstream and solve the mental health epidemic of the adults in their lives. And the best place to do that is where they spend the majority of their time, and that is at work. So this book is not just about mattering at work, but that is going to be a large portion of it, is how to build cultures of mattering at work, at home, in your marriage, in your friendships, in your neighborhood, in your extended family, in greater society. So for this second book, I've traveled the world, and I am so excited to share the stories of how people were able to figure out how to unlock their mattering and how to unlock it in the people around them. And let me just give you a little primer about mattering. So mattering is not my idea. It's been studied since the 1980s, but it's been sort of locked away in the ivory tower. And so Never Enough was one of the first popular books to bring mattering out. And what I found in the research and what I saw on the ground was that the people who are doing well are ones who feel like they matter for who they are at their core. They feel valued by family, by friends, by their wider community, and they have an opportunity to add value back at home, at work, and in the wider community. And so mattering acts like a kind of protective shield. It doesn't mean that people don't have setbacks. And of course, they go through life transitions where their mattering is in flux. But having this deep sense of mattering, knowing how to unlock it in ourselves, knowing how to unlock it in those around us is what can protect mental health. And when we can really help the adults figure out how to build up their resilience and mental health and well-being, they can then show up as the first responders to our kids' struggles.
Mm. Yes, there's a trickle down as the adults discover it. And thinking about it with kids, how would you say mattering and value, because you talk so much about value, change kids? And how do we help them catch the vision at different ages, would you say? The
Oh,
importance.
I would say that mattering, for Never Enough, I went in
Mhm.
search of the kids who were doing well despite the pressures. And I outline, these common threads that they had in common, but it really boiled down to this. The kids who were doing well felt like they mattered for who they were deep inside. And the kids who weren't doing well were those who felt like their mattering was contingent on how they looked, how they performed, or this other group that was suffering were kids who felt like they mattered at home, but their parents never relied on them to give back to anyone other than themselves. So they lacked social proof that they mattered. So what I would say to parents is you can start unlocking the mattering in your children from day one, right? It's mattering is making them feel significant, getting a PhD in them, letting them know that they are uniquely known and valued. Appreciate them out loud, depend on them, give them chores. The chores are not just a way of us getting out of sweeping our kitchens as adults. Chores teach kids how to be functioning members of society, really, because family is the first introduction to society for a child. And so learning how to be a functioning member of the family is how we teach them how to matter in the wider world. And, another way as the kids get older is helping them locate genuine needs in their communities. So not necessarily what they want to do to help out, but what's actually needed. What do people actually need? And how can you use your strengths to meet them? I visited a school in Ohio called St. Ignatius, and their motto is the Jesuit motto, which is something I've adopted in my own house, which is raising kids not to be better than others, but to be better for others.
Mm.
So if we really want to protect our kids, it's giving them that for other mindset. Doesn't mean abandoning their own wishes and wants and needs, but it's balancing. As a society, we've come out of balance. And when we're overly focused on our own success, it comes to a detriment to that child's mental health.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, you are saying so many important things. I cannot wait for folks to hear this episode.
They're going to be taking notes the whole time.
I know. We love to ask you this too. We talked a lot about how in all these decades of doing this work, we just have never sat with as many parents who are as weary and discouraged as parents are currently right now. And just would love to ask you, through your work, through your research, what would you want to offer to weary and discouraged parents?
I want to say that I traveled the country and I found kids who were doing well, and their parents were not superheroes. Their parents were intentional. Their parents lived their life by their own definition of success. They leaned into their own values. They surrounded their families with people with similar values. It does not, trust me, there is a way out. There is a path forward. And the path forward really can be found through helping our children learn how to matter to their little world and therefore to the wider world. It's to me, there is so much hope out there, and I've seen it in action.
Thank you.
And thinking about that, I mean, it sounds like there is a lot of parents not only doing their own work, but realizing that there's a lot of grace in the midst of it. And so what would you say kids need most from parents today?
I would say kids need to know that they are loved unconditionally. And I have yet to meet a parent that didn't love their kid unconditionally. But so many kids don't hear our love as unconditional. So not only do we need to love them unconditionally, we need to regard them positively at home. So in other words, we need to be explicit about our feelings for them, explicit about how their worth does not equal their grades, explicit to separate the deed from the doer. When our children inevitably make mistakes, make bad choices, to make it clear that they are not a bad kid. They are who they are. They are worthy no matter what. And we need to work on that action. So giving them a sturdy sense of worth. I mean, I met a mom in my travels for Never Enough who did this thing that I've now started doing to really underscore and make the thinking around unconditional worth visible. When her kids would be really hard on themselves, she would reach into her wallet and grab a bill. Let's say it's a $20 bill. And she would say to her kids, "Do you want the money?" And they would say, "Yes." And she'd say, "Okay, hang on." She'd wrinkle it up. She'd dirty it on the floor, dunk it in a glass of water, and then hold up this soggy, dirty, wrinkled bill and say, "Do you still want this money?" Like this $20 bill, your value doesn't change, whether you've been knocked down, cut from the job, rejected by a friend, rejected by a college, your value doesn't change. And to me, that is such a profound way and simple way of just hammering home the idea that they are born worthy. And we live in a society that makes a lot of money off of telling us we're not good enough, not good enough yet. That's one thing I often say when I go and I speak to high schools. I'll say to them, when you start feeling bad about yourself and feeling like you're not enough, think about who's making money off of those feelings. And
That's
boy,
so
do
good.
their eyes light up. Teenagers are so smart. Let them in on the game. Let them see it. They are clever. And so anyway, it's one of my favorite things. When you don't feel good about yourself, who's making money off those feelings?
Right. I love that.
So true.
Okay, we end every episode with a shift from the substantive to the silly. We move from the art of family to the culinary arts. So we want to ask you a food-related question here at the end. It's a two-parter. Part one is queso or guac, and part two is what's your favorite taco?
Guac for sure.
Okay.
And I would say pulled chicken.
Ooh, good choice.
Yes.
Good choice. Oh, Jennifer, thank you so much for your work. I mean, as David said, these messages are so not just important, but critical for the lives of kids today. And we're just so grateful that you're out there saying it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the work you do to raise families up.
Well, we're excited for the new book, 2026, right?
Exactly.
Mattering. Yeah. Okay. And where can folks find you and follow all that you're doing?
So they can follow me on Instagram at Jennifer Breheny Wallace, or go to my website at jenniferbwallace.com and sign up for my newsletter. And I give out content around mattering and achievement pressure. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It
So
just
grateful.
is such a treat to meet you.
You too.
David, what a team we have that we get to call friends who help make this podcast possible.
Amanda Young, our operations manager.
Chris Starrett, our engineer.
Our management team at H Squared.
And we are thrilled to be a part of the That Sounds Fun network.
Our music was created by the insanely talented Dave Haywood of Lady A.
And if this podcast felt helpful to you, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, all the things.
We are grateful for you and cheering you on always.